Okay, I'll be quick. Thanks for coming in. What's owed today, Paul, from the 2023 scheme in total? In acres?
What is owed?
Yeah, to farmers.
Well, we're still working through the payments as it stands.
Yeah, I know, yeah, but what's owed from the 2023 scheme?
Well, we don't have a specific figure for what's owed until we calculate what the actual payments due to each participant are. So, as I said earlier, we've paid now 31,000 farmers, and we've paid out a total of 230 million, just over 230 million euro over the period of the programme so far. So, as we work through the remaining payments, which we're doing in fortnightly pay runs over the next number of weeks, it'll become clear exactly what the level of payments due to each of those participants is. And obviously then in comparison to the interim payments that have been issued in those cases, we will reconcile the amounts then that are due to those farmers at that point in time. So we still have to process all of those.
Obviously you have a ballpark figure of, if you're in, is it 55,000, you would have it added up of the budget you had. What would be owed? What's paid and what's owed? That's what I'm trying to find to the people that are still waiting on the money because of the IT problem.
Yeah, but okay, so we would have done our calculations on the basis of an average payment of about 5,000 euro per head.
Right.
So if you multiply that, if you did a crude measurement or a crude calculation and multiply that by 55, sorry?
Is it 275 million?
Altogether, 5,000 times 55, about 275 million, yeah. And we've about 230 million paid. So that on that crude calculation, you would say then that there's about 45 million left to pay.
Okay.
But that would depend on, again, on the calculations that we do.
When do you envisage realistically, because we're getting it, every one of us are getting it from farmers, especially those on where they're doing these assessments on flowers and all that crack, and on the CP zones. When do you reckon, realistically, that those farmers will be paid? Because my understanding is the low-lying farmers, that were a more simpler part of it, would be paid. They're paid fairly well, a lot of them. Whereas if you're doing the assessments on the habitat, it's more complicated. The computer obviously isn't able to do it. I don't know what the reason is. But when do you realistically reckon that the farmers will be paid, or that all the problems will be sorted in the IT?
Well, as I said earlier, we are working on fortnightly payments over the next period of time. So the remaining 14,000 participants will be paid on a fortnightly basis as those payments are cleared. We internally in the department are working on the basis that we want to have essentially the vast bulk of those paid by September, by the time we get through the second pay run in September of this year. Now, it'll depend again on how quickly we get through them. It will depend on the nature of the queries that are outstanding in relation to those cases, because when we processed the payments, when we carried out our prepayment validations, there are always issues that are raised in terms of clarity that we have to get, or clarifications that we have to get, whether that's because of our own internal systems in terms of making sure that information is consistent, for instance, between BIS and acres, or whether it's because of direct communication we have to engage in with advisors and farmers around, for instance, things like change of ownership, withdrawal of actions, particular elements that we have to resolve with farmers and advisors themselves. So there's work ongoing. We've been doing all of that work, obviously, over the last number of months. And like I say, as we resolve those cases, we'll issue those payments on a fortnightly basis. And our intention is to have the vast bulk of them paid, with the exception of those that are genuinely still issues hanging on, whether for change of ownership or other reason. We would expect to have the vast bulk of those paid in September, by September.
Because it's pretty, like, it's hard enough on farmers at the moment waiting. You know, is there a manual way of doing this, rather than if it's problematic that the IT system is not picking up? Is there any manual way that you could speed it or anything? No?
No, there isn't really. I mean, I think, you know, it was mentioned earlier on as well, the complexity of the scheme is quite considerable, particularly when you come to the cooperation project areas and the calculation of payments that are based on the results-based approach. So we really have to have all of the data processed correctly via our computer system in order to generate an accurate payment. If you try to do it manually, you'll end up essentially having to go back over that from an IT point of view later on. And I think probably there's also an increased potential for error if you try to pull out information to do it manually. And to be honest, there is such a wide variety of information that has to be pulled together to calculate those payments that would be an inordinate effort, I think. Which
one thing I would say to you that, and I know it's looking down the road in 4 years' time, that, and we said it here earlier on, that when you ever get this perfected, that you don't go chop it and change and maybe give more options to farmers, that if they don't want to be in a CP zone, that's up to themselves if they want to go into a separate scheme. But the criteria type that if you have it perfected on the IT system, that it would, the chopping and changing every 5 years is problematic to set up even for any of the schemes. And I would ask you to look at that you simplify it as much as possible, the way farmers will be paid on time. If at all possible.
Yeah, I know you did make that point earlier, and look, it is, from our perspective, and the Secretary-General mentioned it too, I mean, the easiest simplification from our point of view would be to keep things as they are.
Just give them more options if they don't want to be in a CP zone, or if they want to go into something else rather than flowers thing, let them do that. You made one comment there, I just picked up on it, that we have a certain area of the country now assessed and environmentally assessed, that it could be for policy later on. What policy would you be referring to that it could be useful for? Like, well, is it?
It's a general point. It's kind of use. I mentioned from a whole of government point of view. I mean, we have now, I think, the type of quality data coming out of the acre scheme, which we really haven't had before. And it's not just data coming from the scheme itself in terms of the results-based scoring that's happening around the country. It's also in the context of the things we have to do as part of the CAP strategic plan implementation in terms of evaluating and monitoring the impact of that on biodiversity and on other environmental criteria as well. So all of the data that's being collected now as part of the scheme, and that will also be added to in the context of monitoring the overall impact of the scheme, that is new, fresh, up-to-date data. It's a baseline and a foundation that we simply haven't had up until now in terms of the biodiversity impact, the habitat state of lands around the country, and certainly not on this scale in terms of 25% of agricultural land. That's 1.15 million hectares that we'll have scored. So that provides massive potential, I think, to use in the context of making those environmental schemes more effective in the future, but also in terms of our collaboration with colleagues in other departments, for instance, in housing, in National Parks and Wildlife Service, and across other areas where we can, I think, combine our efforts in a more targeted way to achieve improvements from a biodiversity or water quality or from any other perspective. I think, in principle, the more data you have in these situations, the better quality program that you can implement, and that's what I was getting at there. It was a general point around, and we can explore the possibilities in the future as to how that data might be used. But I think the very fact that you have it and that we have such a comprehensive scope there in terms of the information, I think provides huge potential for the future.
Okay, in relation to TAMS, is there any focus on, say, with the Ireland coming up, I think it's into next year for the derogation, that farmers at the moment can't get a grant, I think, if they're in derogation? Is there any things in TAMS that's going to come out to if they want to put down extra tanks and that, or is it just for soiled water? And in relation to TAMS, and I see the figures you've given us there, it seemed to be slow enough in getting decisions. Will that speed up as you go forward? And is TAMS like the acres, that you set up a new system again every 5 years? Can you explain that to me? Like, is it the setting up of the new system and everything that's bogging us down, as the man says? Yeah.
I might just take that second question first, just to do that, because it's related to the point that you were asking about acres as well. In terms of getting it slow enough and getting up and running on TAMS, I mean, I think what we have to bear in mind here is the challenge when you look at the timeline of what we had to put in place in the CAP strategic plan. We got our formal approval from the Commission in August of 2022, 31st of August 2022. And we had been trying to scope out and trying to design our systems. But in effect, until we got the approval from the Commission, we didn't know for sure what the detail of the schemes was going to be. So that's from August of 2022, and we had to have schemes up and running and in place by 1st of January 2023. or in 2023. Now, we went ahead and introduced 15 of the 18 CAP strategic plan schemes were introduced in 2023 across pillars 1 and 2, even on pillar 2, to take the example from my point of view. So there was a huge effort there across the board in terms of introducing all of these schemes effectively concurrently. But not just introducing the schemes, we had to actually roll out the schemes while at the same time we were putting administrative structures and new IT systems in place. And that requires a huge amount of cooperation, it requires a huge amount of project planning to put all of those things in place concurrently. And it gets to the point that you mentioned about not wanting to change the pitch totally every 5 years. And as I say, if we could avoid doing that, absolutely, or if we can minimise the overall development work.
Can you avoid that?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean,
I need to get approval. This is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
If you stayed on the same thing and said, this is work on off-witchy to the guys in Brussels, this is work on, can you do that? Are you within your rights? Okay, you can give more money. That's a government's decision. But, or you can take more in. But on the measures, have you the right to continue it on?
In the next programme, it'll depend on the outcome of the negotiations on the next CAP framework, to be frank. And we don't know what that's going to look like. We had to comply with the new framework this time around. So there was quite a considerable change. This round of CAP reform that we're implementing now was quite a considerable departure from previous CAP reforms. It was quite an extensive reform compared to previous reforms. And so we had to make quite considerable changes, not just to the schemes that maybe we would have been used to from an environmental point of view, like GLAS in the past, but also in terms of the new schemes that we were introducing. If for argument's sake, the next CAP negotiation, and member states agreed that they wanted to have a kind of an evolution rather than the revolution that we've gone through over the last couple of years, and if it was a case of steady as she goes and just take things forward in a more I suppose, measured way, then yes, from our point of view, we would have a lot more scope to move forward in a way that is not as disruptive, shall we say, as has been the case with all of these new schemes that we've introduced over the last 2 years. So that's certainly possible, but in a way, that's going to be dictated by the outcome of the CAP negotiations next time around. And also then the flexibility that we'll have ourselves in terms of responding to those negotiations and the new regulatory framework and putting in place the measures that we can. So, as I say, we will try to do that, but it will depend on the framework. And maybe just very quickly to answer the point around the TAMS and it being slow to get off the ground, it is related to that point as well, the fact that we are and were concurrently introducing a range of schemes across the board. We had to make a lot of changes to TAMS compared to the last time around. And yes, the approvals were slow in getting up and running, but I think if you look at the figures and the figures that I quoted today, and we publish our TAMS figures weekly on the website, I think you can see there that the approvals have been picking up in a very consistent way, in a very, I think, considerable way. I think we're pretty much through all of the tranche, the first 2 tranches of TAMS 3 now in terms of approvals. We're working through tranche 3 as well. And we're also now into the stage where we're starting to process payments as well. So I think we're catching up. We'd hope now by the end of this current tranche, when it closes in September, that we'll be at the point of essentially catching up and getting back in line with the timelines we would have seen previously in TAMS 2 in the previous programme. So around 14 weeks from the point where an application.
September, Paul, is it?
The current tranche opened on the 13th of April and it'll close on the 6th of September.
6th of September.
Yeah, and the following tranche will close on the 6th of December. So we would hope that by 6th of September and into September itself, that we will have caught up in terms of the timeline for the cycle of
so applications are still going to TAMS 3?
Applications are still coming in, yeah. The tranches roll over from one into the next. So essentially tranche 4 opened on the 13th of April, the day after the closure of tranche 3, and that'll stay open until the 6th of September, yeah.
Okay, we have a vote, so Tim, will you take the chair? Right.
Paul and the department to get the payments out for TAMS as quickly as possible. Farmers need that money and they've been waiting for it. And I know that you did let a lot of people in that scheme last year and that was appreciated as well. And it is a good scheme, but try and get the payments out to them because farmers, as I say, are in need of that payment. Thank you.
No, thank you, Deputy. We will do that, yeah.